So welcome back to the podcast that isn't really a podcast. It's more so ASMR, but isn't really ASMR either, so I don't really know what it is. An ASMR podcast that isn't that, but feels like that, but probably something you can sleep to, but who knows. I hope you're all doing well, having a good week, a good month. I know it's been a little bit, and there's a handful of reasons for that. I'm not going to go into an extreme amount of detail, but my week has been very full on. Obviously, I haven't uploaded for the past 7 days, and it feels very disgusting on myself to do that, but it's been a stressful time. One of these weeks, I will say that I've had a very good week. I promise you that, but just this week, it's been rather chaotic. So there was some good that came out of it, however, kind of mentally realigning myself, but also getting a little bit better regarding health and not being sick. I've been on and off being sick. Nothing overly serious, but stuff that's just really impactful to like day-to-day things. And it's obviously very annoying, but I've managed to kind of push past it and slowly back on track. I also managed to see people that I haven't seen in many years, which was a very nice change of pace. With that, I want to thank you for all of the amazing support and nice words on these videos specifically. Of course, alongside my other ones, but these ones are stuff that I expect to not do well in the grand scheme of things, but just because of how they're centered or what it's built around, or just the fact that it's an audio-only podcast, it's very minimalistic, but a lot of you seem to really enjoy it, whether you put it on in the background or fall asleep to it or whatever it may be. So thank you. I truly appreciate it. And you left some very interesting topics for me to talk about this time. So I do have a litany of very differing questions. But as usual, I want to start this off with one of my own topics, which is YouTube, more so directed towards the newer creators on this site that are building up their audience or their platform, and to kind of give my, I don't want to say old head perspective on it, because I'm still very new and a part of the quote unquote newer generation of YouTubers within the anime and manga industry, but more so my experience and seeing the weird paths that a lot of these creators are taking. And this is definitely not a fault of them, but more so the false sense of security that YouTube provides. It creates this very weird echo chamber that rewards you for very specific things, but in the long run completely devalues or slowly destroys your channel from the inside. And I know a lot of these creators are very passionate, are very hardworking, and it's very inspiring to see, especially for myself that struggles with making content or feeling happy with what I create or feeling like I'm not providing good enough content. So it's great to see these young creators coming up within the industry and thriving wholeheartedly. It pains me to see them make mistakes that a lot of people have made many years ago, and their channels are in very weird positions today. So hopefully a little bit of my perspective or insight from my journey with YouTube could be maybe not necessarily rewarding for some creators, but may provide a bit of information that is unknown or a refreshing perspective. YouTube is a very weird place. It is very difficult to navigate, and there is many pros mixed with many cons. It is a up and down battle. Some people have it easy in the regards of having videos that blow up or having a really addicting or alluring personality, and they can portray that within their videos in such a beautiful way that builds their community very quickly. Look at some of these newer YouTubers that have gained millions of subs in a 6-month time frame. It's crazy to think about how quick they blow up. However, the norm is very different, and it is a very long and tedious process, but one that feels very worthwhile. Hitting your first 100 subs or your first 1,000, 10,000, 50,000, even for me recently 100,000, still feels extremely rewarding. It's milestones like those that you want to push towards, that keep you moving forward. However, because of how YouTube provides, like I said, this sense of security that is inherently false, you somewhat fall into traps that I have experienced myself, and that I also see a lot of these newer creators doing. And honestly, it is not your fault. When you're early within making content, you obviously want videos that do well. And when a video does do well, whether it's conceptually or the series that you're talking about, you tend to try to replicate that as much as possible. This starts you on this very weird track of slowly unraveling all the hard work that you've done. Because you see it happen so often with channels that specifically talk about one series and one series only. I would recommend to always avoid this, because you'll have a video that does extremely well for one series, and then you want to capitalize on that, so you talk about it again and again and again, and you see your views piling up and they're doing extremely well, but your growth is very slow in comparison. If you're getting 20 to 60,000 views per video and you're not blasting it to 100,000 subs and you're not rolling onto it within a singular year, maybe even 2, there's obviously a problem. Once again, it's not the fault of you. You may be making a lot of money from it, but your channel completely starts to revolve around one series, and it is the worst thing that you can do. There is so many channels that I have seen that have put so much time and effort into talking about one series they've truly loved, and you can appreciate them for that. You can respect them for that. It's a passion that they've put a lot of hard work and effort into. But when they talk about other series or other things, it's not as enticing because they're not getting the same amount of views. They may go from 20 to 60,000 views to 5,000 or maybe 10,000 views. But what happens when that series completes? What happens when it finishes? Every story that you read will come to an end, and if you focus your channel around one specific series, it's going to be very difficult to move on to something else. It's going to be very difficult to jump to another series, and then you don't want to jump to another one specific series because the same thing's going to happen. It's like rebuilding it all over again, and then you're alienating a massive portion of your original community because they may not like the new series that you're jumping into. Do you see how focusing around one specific series is inherently bad? I can fully understand why people do it because the views are super alluring, and that's usually the reason why people do it. You're growing, and then one video does extremely well, so you try to capitalize off it. That video does extremely well, and then it just steamrolls into talking about the one series, and you grow from there. But all of these channels that are pulling so many views are barely getting anything in return in terms of growth. And if they are getting something in terms of growth, it's going to come to a screeching halt when that series comes to a conclusion. And if you're doing YouTube with the intention of turning it into a job or something that is a passive income or something that you want to make a very legitimate and healthy thing, talking about one series isn't the way to do it. And YouTube will always reward you for it. Hence that false sense of security. Obviously, I don't want to tell people how to run their channel. I don't want to tell people how to do things if they don't feel comfortable doing it, of course. So just know that if you find yourself in a position where you're leaning towards one series constantly, maybe take a step back and try to visualize the full picture if possible. That if you get stuck with one series that is carrying your channel, when that series comes to an end, what are you going to do then? I experienced it with Tokyo Ghoul. I made, myself known through Tokyo Ghoul, and I wasn't getting anywhere near the likes of some of these creators now that are pulling 20 to 60,000 views talking about, One Piece, for example, because that's a great series that a lot of people center their channel around, which is perfectly fine for them if that's what they want to do. But I didn't truly see growth until I started branching out, until I started talking about many different things and started to open up my own content. If there was any recommendation or thing that I would tell people to do, is that please do not pigeonhole yourself into one series. I know you want to get all these views and get all these subs and everything in between and make a good amount of money, but if this is something you're serious about, if YouTube is something that you want to make a legitimate thing consistently and future proof, do not rely on one series. Do not pigeonhole yourself creatively into one series. You may really dislike the fact that you talking about another series doesn't do as well, and that is always going to be a thing, but I guarantee you for the future it will work out so much better, and you'll probably find yourself even growing more within subs, within a bigger community that enjoy your content for anything that you talk about, and not just for Jujutsu Kaisen or Chainsaw Man or One Piece or Naruto or Bleach or whatever it may be, you know what I mean? And that's not to say that it's impossible to bring yourself out of that pigeonhole when a series ends. I somewhat done it with Tokyo Ghoul, but it was a very uphill battle to realign my channel. Even today, it still kind of plagues me a little bit. Not necessarily too much, but it still has its issues. It still has its lingering problems there. But I'm grateful for Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re, and I'm grateful for the lesson that I learned. I'm not entirely sure why I wanted to talk about that, but maybe it's because I see a lot of channels nowadays feeling really upset with their views or upset with their growth, and it is a hard thing to nullify, hard thing to look away from when a video does really poorly that you've put so much time or effort into, compared to a video that you might have spent an hour or a couple of hours on that is insignificant to the amount of creativity you've put into it compared to something else, but then it does really well. Then obviously trying to replicate concepts or you talking about a specific specific series constantly because it's obviously doing well. And then that leads to you pigeonholing yourself, and that leads you to your channel only being recognized with one specific series, and that series will come to an end and you will have to go elsewhere. Some people are happy with talking about one series. Maybe their conceptual work for the things that they do talk about makes it very creative and opening for them, which is perfectly fine. Maybe you fit within that category. There's a lot of channels nowadays that are more than healthy, that are doing extremely well for series that haven't been published for years, for series that have come to a conclusion many years back. It's because their concept, their ideas that they put into those videos are very creative. It gives them like an endless possibility to continue talking about that one series. And maybe it links to other stuff that they want to talk about if they want to talk about it within the future. Hopefully this helps or gives a different perspective. I'm not entirely sure, but I do think it was something that had to be not necessarily addressed, but at least talked about in some sort of way. With that said, moving on to the first question. What is a series that is hated by the anime community but is loved by the manga/light novel community? And what are your thoughts about said series? 2. Are you considering releasing a rough story of Trauma Service, kind of like a first chapter? To answer the second question, side note, Trauma Service is the series that I mentioned in the previous video. It's a series that I'm somewhat working on. It's not a manga, it's more of just a novel in general. It's very, very early within like a work in progress. I don't know if I'll ever release it because I'm some sort of perfectionist. And if I ever become happy with some sort of rough story for it, I may eventually release it, and I will definitely let you all know. But for the first question, I think the obvious answer there is Tokyo Ghoul or even Kingdom. Tokyo Ghoul has a very weird history for its anime. Its seasons have changed drastically between one another. The first season was alright. It wasn't the best thing to ever exist, but it definitely wasn't the worst. It was very enjoyable and it gave you a good insight into Tokyo Ghoul. But directly after that, they went into filler territory. They created a whole new version of the story that was non-existent, and no one was really sure why. And while people really enjoyed it with what the new non-canon story provided, artistically, emotionally, and atmospherically, it was completely different. It was not Tokyo Ghoul. Even the first season wasn't really Tokyo Ghoul in terms of atmosphere, in terms of emotion. It was more vampiric horror, which I feel like they definitely used as inspiration to make it a possibility. The Tokyo Ghoul re-anime, season 1 and season 2, is just something that is watered down to the extreme. There's really not all too much great that you can pull from it when you compare it to the manga. It is probably the biggest reason why I tell people constantly that if you want to experience Tokyo Ghoul, the anime is not going to give you the slightest of what the manga actually represents. The anime is a non-existent or poor representation or reflection of the Tokyo Ghoul manga experience. You will have a much better time in regards to its emotion, its atmosphere, its tension, its characters, its trauma, its artwork, its beauty, its soul. Ishida, the author, has a very specific way of crafting his world, his characters, his thoughts, and how that is reflected within his artwork. The anime has none of that. Kingdom is basically the exact same thing, except I want to say worse. It's just a very rough adaptation for no reason whatsoever, even though Kingdom is one of, if not the most popular seinen weekly manga to ever exist, that constantly competes and sells within the top 5 most sold every single year for manga, especially when it doesn't have an English release and is barely translated into other languages. Kingdom is neglected, which doesn't necessarily surprise me because it's Chinese political warfare that uses or it rotates around real world events. It's not a one-to-one retelling, but it does use it as inspiration and a source of influence very constantly. Specific characters, specific places, even specific events correlate to real world events. I think definitely those two, Tokyo Ghoul and Kingdom. Moving on. First of all, hope you were drinking your water. I am. Thank you very much. Second, what are your thoughts on the new Big 3 Dark 3? Jujutsu Kaisen, Chainsaw Man, and Hell's Paradise. First and foremost, the new Big 3, we're not going to make this a thing. I know you didn't mean any ill intentions by it, which is perfectly fine. I'd like to call this, alongside a litany of other people, the Hellset, right? The Big 3, I feel like, is a staple of Naruto, Bleach, and One Piece. That was their era, that was their success, and the reason they called them Big 3 was because of that. Having a new Big 3 doesn't really make sense to me. I think a lot of people tend to say it, which I feel is perfectly fine if that's what they want to do, but because there's so many successful series nowadays, so many popular series, it's hard to really say what is like the next Big 3, and people just kind of equate it to Weekly Shonen Jump, but we've moved so far past just Weekly Shonen Jump. We have seinen series. We have Jump Plus series that are outselling and outperforming a lot of Weekly Shonen Jump series. We have Weekly Shonen Jump series that are outselling and performing the previous big three. So are they the big three? I'm making this more convoluted than it has to be, but I just don't like using the term big three for successful series. I like the idea of pulling them into sets. So this would be the Hellset. They're all pretty equally dark and mysterious and chaotic and have this very unique vibe to them. And it works because Hell's Paradise isn't a shonen series. It's in Jump Plus. A lot of people think it's a Weekly Shonen Jump series, and I don't blame them, but it is an 18 plus story, and you can only read it if you're 18, literally on the sites. You have to be signed in with an 18 plus account. But it was also published on Jump Plus, and Jump Plus doesn't have like a specific age bracket. It does post for shonen audience and seinen audience. So anywhere from mid to late teens to early adulthood. That in itself is a bracket, but it's not a specific one because its range is pretty much endless. So Jump Plus can quite literally have any story. But I like the Hellset. I think the series are incredible. I wish Hell's Paradise got more attention towards it. I want to say it was in the early stages of Jump Plus really coming to fame. If it released now in today's kind of Jump Plus popularity, I feel like it would be absolutely massive. Probably not as massive as Kaisen or Chainsaw Man, but definitely much bigger than what it already is, which it still is a very successful series. I'm definitely curious to see what new sets come out. I think currently at the moment you could say that there is I don't want to say a big three for Jump Plus, but more so like the Jump Plus set or the Success set. I don't know what type of phrasing you want to give it, but you have Kaiju number 8, Spy X Family, and Dandadan that are extremely successful within Jump Plus. So those three series are like the new next things, and I wouldn't be surprised if people give them like a set theme or something similar to the Hell set, similar to the big three. And I like that. I think that's a pretty cool idea and having these specific themes or sets for whatever reason for a grouping of specific series. To the next question. Also, in your personal opinion, Chainsaw Man or Jujutsu Kaisen? This probably won't be a surprise to many people, but Chainsaw Man. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely adore Jujutsu Kaisen. I love everything about it, and me liking Chainsaw Man does not come at a disservice to Jujutsu Kaisen. It's not meant to devalue it. For me, I personally enjoy Chainsaw Man more, specifically because of the world and the characters and the overall emotion that Fujimoto has brought across in a way that isn't seen all too often. And for a it's become like his unique signature or style now, which is rippling throughout the community in a lot of other works that are trying to replicate it. Not only are his assistants now publishing their new works that are heavily inspired and are doing their own beautiful takes on it and their own version of it, which is incredible to see with Dandadan and Hell's Paradise, for example. But there's definitely going to be other series that are going to try and channel that chaotic nature and build upon it. Fujimoto-esque is now like a theme of work, and it's great because I feel like it's a perfect way to describe what that work is indicative to. If I call something Fujimoto-esque, if you've read Chainsaw Man or if you read Fire Punch, for example, or even any of his one-shots, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know exactly what this story is probably going to be. Not to mention that you can kind of read Chainsaw Man two different ways. So on the first hand, you can kind of just take it at face value and be this very chaotic and pretty overwhelming experience, but very enjoyable. And then the second way is something that doesn't handhold you, something that doesn't give you every facet of information, but underneath the main story, there is another deeper and darker and more meaningful story connected to it all, at its roots, at its core. Every single version of Fujimoto's work has this core. It has these roots. It has a story that lays dormant completely underneath that only briefly ties to the main story. And he does this with so much purpose and finesse and intent that you can pull apart Chainsaw Man so many different ways and find so many different meanings if you want to experience a story like that. So you can read the story basically two different ways. It's the reason why I personally enjoy it more than Jujutsu Kaisen. And one of my personal favorite videos is me talking about Denji's childhood, his father, his mother, his trauma, and how that is indicative to his growth, his mental, emotional, and physical abuse that he experienced, and how that has stunted his growth. That is stuff that isn't shown to you within the story. You could read Chainsaw Man and not even recognize that stuff is in there, but when you start to peel back the layers, if that's something that you enjoy doing, you see all of this at its core. It is very impactful, it has a whole lot of depth towards it, and it's a beautiful thing to experience. That is why I've really fallen in love with Fujimoto's work, and I'm more than glad and extremely happy that his work is finally getting recognized globally. Look at his recent one-shot called Look Back that had so many different incredible and talented manga authors praising him, saying that it was a masterpiece, that it was so beautiful. That's an extremely great thing. I think Fujimoto is on track to become a very well recognized and world-renowned author. With that, however, moving on. These two questions kind of join together. What is your favorite genre of music? Also, do you have a favorite artist or band? What type of music do you listen to? Any specific songs, albums, artists, genres, or just thoughts on the topic overall? The music that I listen to is very all over the place. I don't think a lot of you know how on and off or how many different things I can listen to within like a singular day. I absolutely love music, to how it's utilized within movies or TV shows. Like the cinematic scores, they're very beautiful and grandiose in that department, all the way down to, singular rap music, pop music, emo, punk, whatever it may be. There's so many different things that I love about music. When it comes to listening to it in general and what I favor, I'm also sit within the rap community. So growing up, I listened to a lot of like Lil Wayne and Eminem and Jay-Z and NWA and stuff like that, right? Pretty simple. Odd Future, for example. As of more of the recent years, I am a massive fan of XXXTentacion. He was an incredible artist and someone that I am more than grateful that I got to experience his journey from start to finish. He wasn't someone that I found halfway through his fame. I managed to come across him very early within his SoundCloud period, very early within his music creation process. While he rose to fame extremely quickly after Look at Me, I was so in love with his music. And then because of him, I found people like Ski Mask and Denzel Curry, and I fell in love with their music and experienced their journey to fame, their evolution in music creation, and they've grown so beautifully. Juice WRLD, Lil Peep, so many incredible artists that I have such fond memories of that I appreciate wholeheartedly. And it almost gets me teary thinking about them all passing and how incredible they all were, with X, Juice, and Lil Peep. Because I listened to all of those so deeply, experiencing them back to back hit rather hard for myself. I think for a lot of people that listen to one of those artists or all three of them, that was a rough time. Those were such talented individuals. I think that gives you a pretty good taste of what I listen to on a day-to-day basis, but I'm pretty much open to anything. Recently, I've been listening to a lot of Scarlord. I've been a big fan of his for a good handful of years now. Trippie Redd released an album recently, which was pretty good. Have not listened to Kanye's new album, have not listened to Drake's new album, which don't really care for all too much. I'll probably listen to them eventually, but I'm just not that crazy over their type of music. I think it's great. I think it's enjoyable. People love it. Perfectly fine. I'm trying to think of like underground people that I really enjoyed recently. Not underground, but Leroy from Australia. He's been doing extremely well. Had a very incredible album or EP, whatever you want to call it. So Fago is pretty enjoyable. Kenny Mason's really good. Kenny Hoopla's really good. Just everything really. I have like an endless range of taste. I can pretty much enjoy anything. I think that gives you a pretty good example of how diverse my music choice is and what I'm really into. As of recent, it's just been all Scarlord and all kind of more hardcore stuff. Zilla Kami and Sauce Muller, for example. So that's been really enjoyable. Can you talk about coping after your favorite anime/manga is over? I think it's definitely a difficult thing, something that you've spent so many years with, watching it finally come to a conclusion. I think there's a beauty within that, however, a completion, a sense of wholeness for that story that you've finally managed to experience its ending. But I'm also the type of person to kind of reflect on my appreciation for being able to read that story when I did. And there's a lot of stories like that. It's going to be different for a lot of people, obviously, but I read a lot of different things, and a lot of series I tend to forget about, and that doesn't devalue that experience. It doesn't mean that it's worse than other stuff that I remember every single day, but instead I try to appreciate in the moment the experience that it's given me. Because of how much I've read, I don't expect every single series to linger within my memory because of its impact. So I don't usually try to justify the value of that series by how I remember it or how much it's impacted my memory or how much I can think about it. Instead, within the moment while I'm reading, I appreciate that I'm able to experience this beautiful story. And then after it's done, I appreciate what it was able to give me, what I took from it, what I learned from it, and just how much I might have fell in love with it. Every opportunity I get, I will mention The Horizon. The Horizon is the best example for it. Something that literally tore my soul apart and I knew nothing about it. 21 chapters, a manhwa, children within a war-torn country. I didn't expect anything of it. I did not know what I was getting into, and it tore me apart. That story is so difficult to write just from a literature perspective, so obviously I value it extremely heavily because of that, but its emotional turmoil and the audacity the author has, and I always phrase it this way, the audacity the author has to write a story like that, to do the things that they've done, to put you through this experience is ridiculous. It is heartbreaking. It is beautifully soul-crushing and so extremely well done. I appreciate it wholeheartedly. So I think that's how I cope with stories that are finished. Moving on, however, have you tried watching Korean films? They are amazing. I would recommend Parasite and Oldboy if you haven't already seen them. Would love to hear your thoughts. In the previous episode of this, I actually cut out a segment of me talking about foreign films just because it dragged on very weirdly and sporadically, but I guess I'll mention it now. Absolutely love foreign films. I'm not entirely fully versed on them, but Parasite was impeccable. Absolutely love Parasite. I also grew up watching Ong Bak, and I either triggered a lot of people because I did not pronounce that word right, I apologize, or I triggered nostalgia. A lot of you may not even know about it, but Ong Bak is such a wild story. It's a martial arts story. It focuses entirely around Muay Thai and Tony Jaa, and it's just beautiful. Very chaotic, very wild, but I grew up with it. Not entirely sure how I was introduced to it, but I think I really enjoyed fighting movies at the time. Ong Bak was this foreign film that I guess sparked my love for foreign films. The fighting choreography was surreal and insane, and it kind of pushed me to learn Muay Thai as well and to train myself in boxing, Muay Thai, kickboxing, etc. within my teenage years. So from there, I haven't really moved into a big territory of foreign films, but I have seen a handful, and I do want to move further into experiencing them. I do want to get into TV shows, foreign TV shows, and I haven't really put my thumb on one that I really want to watch other than Sweet Home. Just because I've read the manhwa, I think the manhwa is great. I would like to see how it's adapted to a Netflix adaptation. So hopefully I'll get around to that soon, and hopefully I'll enjoy it. I haven't seen Oldboy though, but I feel like I've heard really great things about it alongside, is it Mr. Sunshine? Which is supposedly like a classic, very emotional romance type story. I'll probably check them out soon. So now we are here with the final question. What do you think are the most important things to write a character well? While I could take this question and spiral it into so many different avenues, so many different things that a character needs to thrive and to be alive and to be quote unquote well, I can boil it down to coherent. I think what makes a well-written character, past all of the avenues that you can take them down, is a coherent character. One that the author understands through and through. If you are an author that tries to write a character that you do not understand, you will not respect or reflect whatever character that you are trying to write in an accurate manner. They are no longer coherent, and people will easily recognize this. It is quite literally the biggest reason why I enjoy series surrounding trauma or mental health or very mental or emotional severe issues, is because writing those things takes a sense of knowledge, and then portraying it accurately with respect is so difficult to do, but if it's done well. It's done because the author understands that trauma, they understand that mental or emotional issue, and how they portray it in a coherent way that isn't distasteful, that isn't with shock value, that isn't with this other overlaying themes on top of it, but more so weaponizing it in the most brutal but beautiful way possible, is something that I absolutely adore. And it all boils down to coherency. Having a coherent character that the author knows what they want to do with, that you recognize where they may or may not go. See, the thing is, even me just saying this doesn't cover every aspect. There's so many things that makes a well-written character. You can't just have coherency and then not everything else. A lot of people talk about subjectiveness and objectivity within manga, within literature, and I think people have a very odd perception of it. Quite literally, everything can be somewhat subjective, or it can be framed in a way that is subjective. There is objectivity within literature. That is 100% a thing. However, your viewpoint or your perspective on that objectivity is subjective. there is certain kind of more so universal rules that I feel like people don't necessarily comprehend or completely ignore, that are more so objective than subjective in terms of writing. I guess to give somewhat of a simple example of that, you would never want to write a character with all this detail and then kill them off without showing it, without talking about it, but maybe only alluding to it, and then just instantly bringing them back with no explanation whatsoever. That is objectively bad, but your perspective on it could be subjectively good. You may experience it a different way and find some good within it because of the ripple that it causes. I think it boils down to how the reader interprets certain events and the conversation that they give birth to. So while there is universal rules within literature that you probably shouldn't do, and that could definitely lead you down your story being objectively bad, even if you still do those things, people can get enjoyment out of that, so their perspective is good. People rarely care about things being objectively good. If a character gets killed off and then comes back with literally no explanation, that is the worst thing that you could do. That devalues a lot of things within your story, not just the character that you just disrespected, especially if you don't have an explanation for it. And this is just the extreme variation or extreme example of it. But people can still find enjoyment out of that. People cannot care about that whatsoever. So that does not devalue their opinion, nor does that devalue the subjectiveness of that situation. It's all based on perspective. So as much as you can say there is certain weird facets of objectivity within literature, and then it's more subjective, I tend to just say don't worry about it in general. I know this has spiraled into a whole different conversation, I apologize, but don't worry about objectivity within literature. Don't worry about the subjective side of it. Just enjoy the perspective side of it. I think that's what I always push, is there is so many different ways people experience a story, and I want to hear what other people think. I think that's why watching YouTube videos or watching people talk about series is so enjoyable, because everyone's going to have their own version of it. Everyone's going to have their own experience, their own emotion, and that creates a very engaging conversation. I don't care if something's objectively bad or objectively good. All I care about is your perspective and what you enjoyed and what you didn't enjoy, and how you appreciate certain things or how you dislike certain things, how you view the story, how you view the world, how you view the characters. That's what I enjoy. Not everyone has to be like that, but I would recommend trying to experience it, because it's a great way to view storytelling from other people's perspective as well. So we are here at the end of the video. I want to thank you all for all of the amazing support. It truly means the world to me. I apologize for not uploading for the past week. Hopefully I'll have things back in order now and keep things moving. I want to try and do some more experimental things, so hopefully they turn out well, even though it's all kind of within my head at the moment, so we'll definitely see. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a good rest of the day, night, afternoon, whatever it may be. But thank you. I appreciate you, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.